Well, as air travel roars back, there's intense scrutiny of the industry's carbon emissions. We are decades away from commercial electric flights. In the meantime, sustainable fuels are crucial as airlines race towards net zero. Well, Avril is standing by live at the International Air Transport Association in Geneva with more. Avril.
Liz, as you know, sustainable fuels or sustainable aviation fuels, also known as SAFs, are absolutely critical to the energy transition. And they can come from, cooking or even plant oils. But there's some concern about how they're being sourced given the global food insecurity. Hemant Mistry is Director for Energy Transition at IATA, and he says different pathways are needed.
What's important for us is that we're able to diversify in terms of the feedstocks which are used to develop the sustainable aviation fuels. Right now, we're very reliant on a pathway which we call HEFA, which is hydroprocessed esters and fatty acids. And an example of that is, I think most of your viewers may be familiar with, is used cooking oils form the basis of a HEFA production pathway. What we want to do is to diversify into different feedstocks and different pathways going forward as well. And we can see applications for the use of municipal waste, which has been investigated in terms of certification, and also other pathways which use forestry residues, agricultural residues, etc. as well. Again, they're not competing with food or water, but they're basically, these are pathways we can use to make different avenues for sustainable aviation fuels.
This transition to renewable or sustainable fuels comes at a delicate time for airlines that are already grappling with high jet fuel and labor costs. I spoke to Willie Walsh, Director General of IATA, and started by asking him to what extent these higher costs will likely weigh on carriers in the year ahead.
We saw very elevated jet prices. So this is the difference between the price of crude oil and jet kerosene. What we call the crack spread, it was the widest I'd ever seen. It averaged for 2022 at about 34–35%. During the 10-year period between 2010 and 2019, it was 17%. So this is sort of twice what we would have seen normally. I would expect that to ease a little bit because some of that comes from the lack of refining capacity for jet fuel. So we think some of that will ease. The price of crude oil has been extremely volatile. We expect that volatility to continue into next year, but the overall level of crude we expect to come down slightly from what we'd seen in the current year.
As travel continues recovering, airlines are doubling down on sustainability, and they'll have to ramp up their use of renewable fuels, utilize carbon offsets or carbon capture. How do you think they will go about prioritizing this with their other costs as well?
Yeah, it's a great question, but what I can tell you is that the focus on sustainability is top of the agenda. In fact, during 2022 and indeed 2021, the industry used every single drop of sustainable fuel that was available, despite the very high premium of sustainable fuel over traditional jet kerosene. Now that premium has narrowed, but that's mainly because jet kerosene prices have been elevated. But still, it's more than twice the price of jet kerosene sustainable fuels today, and it's been as high as 4 times. So despite that very significant additional cost, airlines continue to commit to buying sustainable fuels because we recognize that we have to have a credible path to achieving net zero in 2050. And for us, sustainable aviation fuel is going to be the biggest part of our transition from where we are to that net zero target. And it's great to see in Singapore, particularly, a very big investment in the production of sustainable fuels. So we're optimistic when we look around the world that there are certain countries with the right focus, incentivizing greater production. It's not the same right across the world, but we think this will improve as countries more and more recognize that this is a very sensible way to achieve net zero for the airline industry, because you're talking about, reducing your energy dependence on imports, creating sustainable jobs, and helping the environment. It really is a great win, not just for the economy, but for the environment as well.
Until we reach economies of scale, ticket prices, you've pointed out before, will have to rise. Consumers, travelers are already grappling with inflation. Do you think those higher prices might be prohibitive? Do you think they will affect demand?
I don't think it will be prohibitive. I think it will affect demand, because we know that many people are very price sensitive when it comes to flying. Price is a very important element in the decision to fly, but I think we have to be honest with consumers. There will be a cost to transition to net zero. There will be a cost for most, if not all, industries, but for the airline industry, that cost will represent a major challenge for the airlines, and given their financial position at the moment, there's no way they will be able to absorb that. So I expect that consumers will have to recognize that ticket prices will need to increase to reflect the very significant increase in cost that the airlines will face. And as I said, we need to be honest. I think people who believe that this transition is going to be painless are misleading. The cost to the industry at a gross level between now and 2050, we're talking about trillions of dollars. Now, we need to recognize that some of that would have been money we'd need to spend on the replacement of existing aircraft, but it is going to be a big challenge.